It is fascinating that in order for one to call oneself transgender, you must first acknowledge who you truly are and where you came from. You must acknowledge that sex is not merely a social construct, but rather a concrete phenomenon that forces you to be cut permanently to achieve the desired result. And even with the most invasive form to achieve this result, you will never receive what was fashioned in the beginning. The perfection that was given at birth slowly becomes a disfigurement amidst blind trust and a desire for a reality that cannot be. When I began this journey, this deep dive into an unknown world, I had no idea what to anticipate. You want to believe that you're aware, that you are knowledgeable, informed even. But in reality, I had no idea, and I was not prepared. Nothing prepared me for the amount of pain, the sheer amount of pain that was so palpable in my research and the pain that was coming through my screen day after day, story after story. The regret, the absolute horror of waking up and discovering that you have made a huge mistake. I was not prepared for that, and it was like being plunged underwater into this very dark world that did not at all mimic what you see above the ground within this naive fury of the trans movement. It did not mirror the joy that seems to sit on the very top of the surface without allowing anyone to penetrate the gruesome scene that lies below. And what is below, I found to be distorted and lonely. I was armed with information, but no understanding of what it actually looked like when the rainbows disappeared at the end of the day. I had no grasp on what it truly meant to begin this process, to kill the original version of yourself, to implode during the realization, and finally, to live again. The more that we began to dig into the subject of trans ideology, transgenderism as a whole, the longer that this journey began to unfold, I began to ask myself the question of what about my home, the heartland, Oklahoma? If I were to find stories, what would they look like? What would they sound like? And would they emanate what we hear across the United States?
You are about to meet three extraordinary individuals, Laura, Lacey, and Zoe, who found themselves on the cusp of a new contagion. It would ultimately lead them to an inevitable change, unforgettable loss, and the opportunity to face their future.
You know, I grew up with what looked like to most people a pretty normal childhood, and it may not have been as tragic as some or traumatic, but I think we all have areas of our life that are just broken. We have disappointments. We don't have good relationships, and so I grew up thinking that life was supposed to be perfect. Everybody at church thought we were perfect, and we looked like the all-American family. But at home, things weren't always like that. I had a difficult relationship with my mom, and I don't blame her at all, but a lot of it, I just believed a lot of lies. I didn't understand some of the family dynamics. I didn't understand that my mom had a lot of her own brokenness, that she really had, she was having major health problems, and she was not feeling well. She was very noise sensitive, and I was very hyper. I had a ton of energy. I had ADHD, and so I was a little bit wild and rambunctious. She was much closer to my older, very obedient, very quiet, very introverted brother, but also because she had lost two boys between my brother and I. And so I think part of that was she really bonded with him. I just began to interpret it. I didn't know how to understand that. I didn't understand the differences in personality and things like that. I really internalized it, and I began to believe that my mom didn't love me. And I began to believe that she wished I'd been a boy. And so I became intensely jealous of my brother and began to act like him, began to wear his clothes and play with his toys. And I just wanted to be around my brother 24/7. So I spent most of my time with him. I spent a lot of time with my dad. When I went to school and I didn't fit in very well with the girls, because I'd not spent a lot of time with girls. I didn't know how to relate to them. I didn't know how to play with them. I didn't know how to talk to them. They felt weird and foreign, and I just began to believe that I wasn't like the other girls. So I think that's a lot of where that started.
I was born in Lawton, Oklahoma. I was born into a Christian family, though my parents were not really living for Jesus at the time. And so I heard about it, like knew Bible stories and all that. But at the same time, my parents were just not walking what they were talking. Started going through puberty. And with that, I had already started developing anxiety, but with puberty, it just skyrocketed. I read a lot of supernatural fiction, young adult fiction. Just wanted to live in books and just wanted to escape my life. With all of the puberty changes, like my breasts grew early and I was incredibly uncomfortable with classmates that were not mature enough to handle that. On top of that, I just had a lot of negative imagery of womanhood and femininity. I thought it had to be something sexual, and I didn't want it. I didn't want to be sexualized.
Our assistant director, Gabe Woolley, met Lacey at a meeting in Tulsa, and an instant connection was made. Having faced his own struggle with his sexuality in the past, he decided to take on this interview and find out more.
Church was our whole life. We spent so much time as small children going to church and getting involved. But at home, it was different than when we were at church. It didn't necessarily pay any attention to us when we were at home.
Your parents didn't?
No. They'd start doing their own thing, and then we get into mischief and chaos. The way they handled it was different than what I saw over there at church or over there in those environments. I have friends that were a part of the church too, and their families looked much different than ours.
Yeah. Do you feel like you were constantly comparing yourself to other people around you because you didn't feel confident in your own family dynamic?
Yeah, and I don't know how many times I'd ask God, well, why can't my family be like that?
And the identity crisis or the identity struggles that you fell into, and I can think of my own story with my own identity crisis with my sexuality and identity, and just we're on that topic, is what type of foundation what do you think was lacking in your family?
My confidence wasn't built up. I didn't have any courage in anything. My attempts to try new things, things would get shot down.
Who specifically do you feel like did you ever have a better relationship with your mom or your dad? What was your family dynamic?
I had a better relationship with my dad because we could connect a little bit by bringing God into it.
Yeah.
But my mom and I, we didn't really connect at all unless I was reading to her, unless I was doing something she was interested in.
Right. So you almost had to pursue her rather than her pursuing you, you feel like? And do you happen to think, do you wonder if maybe being a little closer to your dad and not as close to your mom, is this your biological mom or
They're my adopted parents.
They're your adopted parents, but do you feel like you maybe had a slightly better relationship with your dad than your mom?
Slightly better. My dad was more gentle.
The father with the masculine role, you having that a little better connection or pursuing it, do you ever wonder, I don't know, does that play a role in the transgender identity of taking on the persona yourself as a man?
I don't know if it was so much from my dad as it was my twin brother.
Your twin brother. What's the dynamic between you and your twin brother?
He did get praised for those things he did, different art projects, different things he got. They enjoyed his stuff, but I draw something and they throw it away. And so to see him have what looked better, I thought, well, if I change and I become a boy, maybe they'll love me better.
What age do you feel like you were in that you maybe subconsciously made that decision in your mind?
It was right around my high school days. That's when I started to gain the understanding of the boys got treated different. I even have an older brother that got treated different, like he was a king, but he was their biological child.
Yeah.
And so I think that had something to do with it too. I always kind of felt like a redheaded stepchild, so to speak.
The mental and emotional components of a trans man or woman are key when it comes to pre-existing traumas and conditions that can further lead the individual into permanent changes. I decided to sit down with Dr. Randy Randleman, a child psychologist who has worked with children for over 30 years. He also represents constituents in Oklahoma's 15th district.
You know, that's an interesting factor because all of the research will tell you that the relationship with the mother is much more important to that child up until 4 or 5 years old. The mother's so important. Then later it switches over to the father. So we can have the traumas happen in either way, but in this case, with the mother, she didn't feel accepted by the mother. So right then she's trying to say, who am I? There's that questioning coming up. Now, is it going to be trans or whatever? She's questioning every answer. And so when we look at that, what it does, it creates a false belief within her, the child. And so then the child's feeling like that I've got to be perfect. I'm not good enough. And the more you deal with that, and especially when you keep it inside and you don't share and have somebody really good to talk to, that becomes festered and it grows and it grows. And our body is set up to survive. So if something's not working, I'm going to try to do something to help it. Kind of like an individual getting into drugs. All they're trying to do is treat themselves because they're not feeling good about themselves. I don't know if you heard me on the house floor, but I talked about how I don't like, maybe transgender for young children. Because it's a problem. It's an emotional problem that's there. No matter whether they do trans or whether it's a marriage or another marriage or et cetera, what you're trying to do is just be accepted and find a way that my mother loves me, my father loves me, because now, see, that's going to transition at about 5 and 6 years old. And guess what? It's multiplied by the trauma that's already there. And if you don't get help, then you're going to find some way to get relief. And a lot of times that's what's happening in these here. And it begins by not having a good relationship with that mother or in the father.
When I was a child, I got along really well with my dad. My dad and I were so close. He was extremely loving and affectionate, and I went everywhere. My dad would come home from several miles away from work just to take me to an errand he had to run after work. We were very close. I went everywhere with my dad. I began to identify with him, and the more that I did, I was told I acted just like my dad, I looked just like my dad, we had the same personality. I really began to seek out that masculine affection and attention. And I didn't understand that it was okay to be a girl and be loved by my dad. I thought I needed to be more like them, really wanted to be like my brother, because even though I was very close to my dad, I longed for that relationship with my mom. But by the time I was 8, I was molested by my friend's brother. He was only a year older than me, and so that opened a world of sexual curiosity. Began experimenting with other kids, and then I felt like I was living a double life. I was hiding a lot and hiding a lot of deep, dark secrets, feeling a lot of shame. I blamed myself and thought something was wrong with me that this happened to me. So it really began to intensify my jealousy of boys because I felt like he had all the control. I felt used and just completely discarded. I began to hate being a girl because I really felt so used by this boy. And so then I began to imagine myself as being the boy a lot more. I began writing stories about being a boy. I began playing lots and lots of video games as a boy character and living vicariously through these characters.
The path to womanhood was going to be rough for both Laura and Zoe. But the concept of sexuality would prove to be even more difficult.
One girl in particular, I just had very, very strong feelings for that I didn't know how to deal with. I would call myself a Christian and had some knowledge about Jesus and was even going to a youth group for a little bit. But at the same time, I was going deeper into that relationship with her, had this almost like double-mindedness where I feared for her soul. I wanted her to know Jesus. But at the same time, I was like, I don't want to give her up. I don't want to give these feelings up. When I ended up in the mental hospital, my family, my dad's side of the family back in Oklahoma, heard about it and was concerned for me. So they came and brought me back to Oklahoma. I felt like God took me away from her. And so I just became very, very mad at God. I started researching the LGBT community just in secret. And eventually, when high school started, 9th grade, started living openly as a lesbian in school. I became promiscuous and had a lot of experiences that I felt I should be the man in this relationship. I should be the masculine one. I even felt like I should have certain body parts that I didn't. I wrestled with that quite a bit in 9th grade.
I feel like if that was a pivotal moment for you, was 9th grade possibly maybe the beginning of what led you to decide that you wanted to be male? Do you feel like that was a contributing time, or do you feel like that came later?
I feel that it kind of, a lot of the dysphoria started in 9th grade, though I didn't have a name for it yet.
So you were dealing with something that you didn't even know what it was that you were actually dealing with.
And I still had awful anxiety and was even skipping school. So like a couple months into 10th grade, I actually ran away from my dad and moved in with my mom in a different city. I had a foster sister who was living with her as well. And she had already been like all into LGBT stuff as well. Was like very big into Tumblr and fandoms and all of that kind of thing. Like I was already openly lesbian to her, but started learning about transgender people more. And we even went to our local library, found a whole bunch of LGBT books, and like as much as we could check out, we got them all in a bundle and just read them together. And that's where I came across a memoir of a girl that was just 2 years older than me in my own state.
Wow.
That was saying all of these things in her life was actually like all of these little things pointed to her being a man in a female body. And that when she started accepting her male identity, started transitioning and going through these medical treatments, she now just has this amazing life and so much more peace and comfort in who she is.
Yeah.
And hearing that story, I was like seeing all these little bullet points like in my own life.
Yeah.
And it completely made sense to me at the time. Like, oh my gosh, that's what's wrong with me. I'm a man. I'm a boy in a girl's body. That makes so much sense.
Yeah.
And it was like relief to come to that conclusion.
Once the individual seeks a more permanent change, institutions, such as libraries, have become safe havens for all things gender and the affirming language they desperately seek out. The complicity of the system here in Oklahoma can be seen on full display. Gender ideology and the driving force behind the trans movement has become a study that has matured into pages and pages of information at the ready in any library in America, including our own. Books that can be picked up and read right in the middle of the kids section. Everything from a guide to being a trans ally to LGBT history books. It all sits ready for little hands and developing minds to get a hold of and begin an unimaginable journey during the most vulnerable time of their lives. The guidebooks seem to be in place for those that seek to radically change their lives. But where are the guidebooks for when things go wrong? Or do those books even exist?
And I did not want to wait. I didn't want to hide it. I immediately came out to my mom. I was already so unstable by this point that she was scared for me.
Yeah.
I just spoon-fed her links to websites and statistics that say, if you don't allow me to transition, I'll just kill myself.
Yeah.
I never openly threatened that to her, but I led her right to all of these things that were telling her that. And she just has a very empathetic, caring heart. So she very quickly got me in to see a gender therapist. We went in upfront about, hey, we're here because I want to transition. I want to start testosterone, and I need you to write a letter to do that. Like, we worked through childhood trauma and stuff, and that was always kind of kept separate from the gender identity issue.
Interesting. Okay.
She saw that I was intelligent and seemed to have some awareness and really believed that I was a male.
Yeah.
So she agreed with that. She affirmed that. 3 months of therapy to be able to get a letter of recommendation for testosterone. My mom had found an endocrinologist that actually had treated transgender people previously. So she was already an ally, already affirming. Even like when I got there, she gave me this little speech of how proud she was of me for accepting my identity and how brave I was.
Would you consider these two individuals to be the first, I'd say the first two individuals to affirm this new alter ego that you were leaning towards, or was there anybody else in your life before then? And I guess I mean outside of your family, were these two people the people that first started to affirm what you were going after?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
they were definitely the first medical professionals that were affirming me.
Yeah.
Not the last though. Before that, around the same time that I had started seeing the gender therapist, I also started going to a LGBT youth group in my city. Just made a lot of fast friends, and everyone was on the same page of like affirmation, encouragement. It was just a very welcoming, uplifting place, honestly. Almost everybody could understand like the mental health issues, the anxiety and depression and things that I was battling.
So you identified with a lot of people that were in the group, yeah.
Yeah.
While Zoe was well on her way to her dream of becoming male, Lacey faced a new threat, being groomed by a man twice her age.
So how old were you when you met him and started dating him, and how old was he?
I was 17 and he was 43.
43.
I just wanted to be loved. I just wanted to be accepted, and I didn't really care who accepted me.
Right. Reflecting back, thinking into it, how did you even get into the transgender identity? The questioning coming from childhood, but what was the tipping point? Who fostered it? Who told you that this was even a thing? And how did you start transitioning? Tell us a little bit about like your transitioning journey from mental to physical.
As a young child, genetically, I had facial hair that grew. I had things that were there, and being made fun of by family and stuff like that, I started shaving my face. I started trying to hide that part. So by the time I was in high school, it was rough, and so then I thought at that time, that's when those questions came up, and I started asking that guy that was 25 years older than me if there was something wrong with me, and he said, no, you were born both.
So you had already met this man, and he was 43 and you were 17. Where'd you meet him?
I went to high school with his daughter.
Okay. So you had a mutual connection. You guys were dating?
I lived with him for about 3 months before we started dating. He convinced me that I loved him.
And then as you began to have a relationship with him, he convinced you that you were both, meaning both male and female. What word did he use? How did he
Hermaphrodite is what he called me, and I didn't even know what it was. So I asked him, and he explained it to me. And then he told me why. He said, based off of your shape and the way you look, that's what you are. And it took 20 years of those words being in my head before I started to spiral out into
becoming that.
The grooming that took place in Lacey's life had planted a seed, and now she was facing the question of her abuser. Am I both? On the other hand, Laura was in full discovery of the transgender life, although she had no idea it even had a name.
So when I began to look into this transition, I'd never even heard the word transgender. This is back in 2007, but that concept was really not even on my radar. But I was thinking about it so much, thinking about becoming a man, that I started looking it up on Google, and I was just shocked when thousands of results came up. And I began to find all these other people who felt like I did. And I think that's what's happening to a lot of people, because nobody was talking about how people didn't like themselves and didn't like their bodies. And then you go online and you see all these people talking about how broken they are, and my life was a mess, and I was depressed, and then I just realized that I was trans, and this fixed all my problems, and it really seemed like the answer at the time. And I joined this support group at the Equality Center in Tulsa, and we met there at the Equality Center. And you're in this place and in this environment where you feel like you're welcomed and you're sort of celebrated, where before it's been this broken mess that nobody wanted to hear about, that you're sort of ashamed of, and you feel guilty and you feel weird. And then you walk into this place that's like accepting and loving, and you feel like everybody opens their arms to you, and you feel like I felt understood for the first time in my life. And that was really what began to really set those ideas down deep in me and believe that this was the truth. And when they told me that, no, if I took these hormones for at least a year or so, no one would ever know I was a girl, that was like everything I'd wanted to hear all my life. There were people that worked in different areas of society that would help, but they were gay themselves. Like there was a guy that worked at the courthouse, so he helped us with a lot of the legal things, but he was a gay man. He didn't have any kind of professional counseling or training, anything like that. So there weren't doctors telling us, evaluating us. What they did was the trans people in the support group told me the WPATH standards that I was supposed to follow, these standards of care that were created to tell doctors how to treat trans people. Per the WPATH standards, I was supposed to go to this therapist. So it's one of the first things I did. I had no interest in counseling, but I went to this therapist just to fulfill this requirement to get this diagnosis. In the third session, she put down her notebook and it's like she stopped for a minute. She looked over her glasses, looked right in my eyes, and she said, "Wow, you really have issues with your mom." And I remember hearing the pain in her voice. She was really sad for me, but I was shocked. It was like, whoa, wait, how did we get from me talking about being a man to talking about my mother? I had not seen the connection. I really hadn't paid attention to where the conversation was going. I was just trying to fulfill this requirement. And I blew up at her. I said, "I'm not here to talk about my mom," because I was so angry at the time. I didn't want to fix that. I thought the body was the problem. And she said, "So you're just here for this diagnosis?" I said, "Yes, that's all I'm here for." And she said, "Okay." And she just gave me this diagnosis. I took this letter stating that I'd been diagnosed with gender identity disorder, which is what it was before it became gender dysphoria. And when that therapist was talking to me and she hit on this issue with my mom, and like I said earlier, my mom is not to blame in all this. I didn't understand the relationship, but over the years, I'd built up so much anger toward her because I had stuffed all my emotions. I didn't know how to talk to her. I'd never resolved anything. I had so much anger and bitterness built up that I didn't want to talk about it all. So when the therapist brought it up, I was like, "Oh no, I'm not going there. This can't be related, and I am transgender, and that's the bottom line." I didn't even want to consider that possibility because I didn't want to fix the mind. I wasn't interested in the truth. I was interested in getting out of my pain. And in my mind, the problem was that women didn't have any value. As a woman, I would never have the worth and value that I longed for. Now, interestingly, I thought I could give that to a woman. I thought if I become a man, I can show her that she's valued and loved. And so that's why I didn't even want to deal with my past. I went to this doctor that I'd been to for years. I had never mentioned this struggle to this doctor. And he was, he was an expert like in hormones and things like that. And he said, "Is this what you really want?" I said, "Yes, this is what I want." And he said, "Okay." And he started me on hormones that day. I got my first shot. And then after that, I was able to do the hormones myself. And with no training in how to give shots or anything, basically other trans people told me how to do it. I just began injecting myself and began going down this path without really ever having studied what this would actually look like. The WPATH standards is a set of standards of care that were created to help doctors know how to treat trans people. They said on their own website, on the DSM website, when they changed from DSM-4 to 5, which is where they changed it from gender identity disorder to gender dysphoria, they stated on their website that it was trans activists. Now they say it as a good thing. They're not belittling them. They're saying, but these trans people helped them understand that this wasn't a mental disorder. This was a dysphoria. They just felt out of congruence with their body. So they helped them understand that this was not a mental disorder.
What does DSM stand?
Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. It's the manual that psychiatrists use to diagnose mental disorders.
WPATH, also known as the World Professional Association for Transgender Health, is comprised of psychologists, medical doctors, many other professions from across the globe. It was formed in 1978 and was initially named after German endocrinologist and sexologist Harry Benjamin. Many in the trans community are referred to what is known as SOC, or Standards of Care. These standards are a driving force behind trans health. According to WPATH, one particular goal is as follows. The overall goal of the SOC is to provide clinical guidance for health professionals to assist transsexual, transgender, and other gender nonconforming people with safe and effective pathways to achieve lasting personal comfort with their gendered selves in order to maximize their overall health, psychological well-being, and self-fulfillment. These standards have recently been highlighted after a major leak was released to the press. In essence, it is alleged that those safe and effective pathways may not be so safe or effective. 170 documents were included in the leaked files that uncovered conversations between various members of WPATH. It brought into question whether or not patients or parents are giving informed consent, the sterilization of children, and reproductive regret. Safe and effective pathways. But does this not display an honest picture of those who have been maimed and deeply wounded by said care? In the horrific case of Yarden Silvera, it does not exist. Yarden, a 21-year-old trans woman, born a man, tragically died from sepsis while seeking help after gender reassignment surgery. Just days before his death, he posted a long review on a Yelp page that belonged to Align Surgical Associates. These haunting words were left behind.
The transgender ideology and its lies, along with the pro-gay media, medical, and psychiatric community, have killed me. The feminization of America will continue to produce outcomes like mine. It wasn't my fault for failing. Everyone failed me. My death shouldn't surprise anyone.
In a time where the boundaries of science are being expanded and science has ceased from being science at all, in a time where evidence is denied but shrouded in the cloak of care, do no harm appears to have taken a back seat. And people, yes, even children, are paying the price. You know, I see you now with your son. I think about, how you're a wife now and you're a mother. Did you ever have any doubts about the direction that you were going in that lifestyle?
So, not really, no.
Which we hear often, yeah.
Yeah. At the age of 16, I completely believed that I was male in a female body. I just really believed that I needed to transition to be okay, that I could essentially start living once I had transitioned and was passing.
Yeah.
And even with starting testosterone and passing as male in public, even though I was still dealing with mental health issues, I was comfortable with the gender part. Like that was not something I wrestled with throughout that time. Yeah. I just completely believed that I was a man. So no doubts really. I started school in a new district in Moore, Oklahoma. And my mom wrote a letter to all the teachers and administration and counselors that I was transgender and that my legal name hadn't been changed yet, but I needed to go by the male name and the he, him pronouns. Almost all of the teachers called me by the male name and he, him pronouns. And there was only one that I distinctly remember that would call me Zoe and she. And at the time, I was so uncomfortable and hated it. I didn't hate her, but I hated what she was doing, what I felt like she was doing to me, to the point of even dropping out of high school. I used that as a reason to drop out of high school. And looking back years later, I wish I could thank her for not giving it to that.
Yeah. But she was affirming who you really were the whole time. Stood her ground.
Yeah. I don't remember her name. But
Yeah. Even looking back now, I know sometimes they call it the honeymoon phase, of the transgender, life. Do you feel like that you had a honeymoon phase where it was just like you were just like elated and kind of on this high emotionally for a while?
For like the first year, I think that was pretty much,
Yeah.
you could say, a honeymoon phase. I started T just 6 months after coming out, and I changed my name and everything, but I still had like severe mental health issues. I was in and out of mental hospitals that whole time. And I just told myself, oh, it's just because I need top surgery. I'll be okay if I get the next thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's always that next external thing.
Yeah.
Did you ever experience any moments of doubt while you were Lance? Like, okay, maybe this isn't right. I'm not supposed to be a man. Or once you were affirmed, was there a good period of time where you were very confidently the male version of yourself?
No, the male version of myself, I was more insecure than I was as myself. So I spent some time incarcerated, and then in that time that I was incarcerated, that was my 3-month cabin. That was my chance to, I was around females that were okay with me taking that step. And there were some in there that encouraged it because of their lifestyle. And so I grew it out. But by the time that I was released with the new appearance. And my first day out of jail like that, I was rejected by everyone who saw me. They knew who I was. They'd spent a lot of time around me. And everybody thought I was absolutely out of my mind.
What steps did you take to change your physical appearance, be transgender, physically?
So about 4 years ago, I found some testosterone on the street, and not knowing what I was doing, I had no idea the amount to use or anything like that. And so I just filled up a whole syringe. And it spun me out of control.
The effect of the testosterone?
Yeah, spun me out of control. I acted like a 13-year-old kid going through puberty. I don't know any other way to explain it.
How did you get a hold of it? From a person, or did you literally find it like abandoned somewhere on the street? How did you actually physically get a hold of the testosterone?
So I knew that my friend's husband was taking it, and I was living in Missouri at the time. And so I waited until they were at work, and I just went in and grabbed one of the syringes and filled it up. And I was only there for about a week after I did that. I was too out of control for all that. She asked me if I wanted to go back home, and she brought me back to Tulsa.
Did you ever use testosterone after that?
Yeah, so I've been in recovery for 2 years, and I think it was about three or so months before I came into recovery that I had taken another shot like that. And once again, I found that on the street. I was hanging out with someone, and he showed me that he had testosterone. I said, cool, and jumped for it. And it about made me go crazy.
So you sort of went the almost like black market route of getting testosterone. You didn't go through it. You didn't see a doctor, or you didn't have a therapist affirm you.
I didn't have a doctor. I didn't have any kind of therapy, anything. I just found it on the street. Testosterone, found it on the street. And everything was affirmed through the street, not having no medical attention whatsoever.
And do you feel like that's more common or on a unique situation, or is it becoming more popular?
I think it's becoming more popular because the crowd that I've seen, I don't know where their means is to go see those doctors. And so, I don't know, I just think it's becoming easier for people to get it just anywhere.
what we have to remember is that we develop in stages. I mean, it's not cut out, but you gain one skill so you're ready for the next stage and for the next stage. What a trauma does is trap you in that stage, and you can't get out of it. And when you try to get out of it, the next stage doesn't fit because you haven't developed the skills previous to that. So realize that in any trauma, you may have PTSD from this. You could have social anxiety problems from this. You could have a depression, even with psychotic features. Because if you don't get help, your brain's going to try to survive. And that's going to be a change of chemicals or whatever that brain has to do. So that trauma traps you there. Now you can't perform a good relationship with others. You can't interact. You can't have good jobs because you're not thinking in a good, healthy manner. So every decision you do leads into getting a little bit worse. And when it finally gets so bad, you may look into being transgender or just the opposite sex, or not even dealing with that, but ways to handle depression, drugs, relationships with others. You know, why does a person that is married marry the same type of person over and over and over? And they go through divorce and divorce and divorce. Here you're going through trauma, try to find a way out, it doesn't work, and then I actually go into transgender things and etc. So you're always trying to find some answer. And when you get into the medical diagnoses and things like that, it's so important for that to be accurate, because then the type of therapy and or with medication, that can be your good answer. But I will kind of finish that question with this, is that just a medication is not good enough. A medication helps you stop it, but it doesn't give you answers how to keep out of it and going back to it. And that's where the key is people willing to be involved in therapy. And guess what? The hardest thing for people to do is talk about their emotions, their feelings. So that's a key factor in any of these kind of disorders.
You know, and initially I went through kind of a honeymoon phase where everything was amazing and there's so much to look forward to. And I really believed this was going to solve all my problems. Because, you know, and even taking those first shots, testosterone really gives you this rush of energy that girls are not used to. You know, men do have more energy and the testosterone can make you feel amazing. Now, you don't realize all the problems you can have down the road because your body's not wired and designed for that. But I didn't realize not only would I have more energy, but I started being much more aggressive. It started suppressing my emotions. And so that made me feel tougher and stronger, which is what myself and a lot of girls are longing for because they've been hurt, and being a girl can feel very vulnerable. So when all of a sudden you feel invincible and you feel tough and you feel protective and those instincts start coming alive. So this seemed like the answer to my problems. And then I remember each little step was always a little bit deflating because it didn't quite have, like I would look forward to it and it was always a little disappointing, but then it was like, well, I have this next thing. So I remember I couldn't wait to get my name legally changed. But as soon as I did, it's like, oh, well, now I've got to do this. Because it's still like, I was always aware that I'm doing something very artificial. Like my body's changing and my voice is getting lower and I'm beginning to grow facial hair and my body's looking a little different. My face is looking a little different, but I'm injecting myself and I know that this is fake, but one day this is all going to be real. That's what I kept believing. And so that kind of spurred me on. So I remember binding my chest and, but I started having so many back problems from the binders. People don't know this, that girls have had major problems with chest binding. I've heard stories of girls who have cracked ribs, girls have popped lungs. At the very least, I was, because I didn't want I ended up with a partner who was a male to female transgender. I had always wanted a girlfriend, but just through some circumstance, I ended up in the relationship with another transgender. And I didn't want him to see me with breasts. So I wore my chest binders all night long. And so I remember my back got in such horrible condition that I decided I had to have the chest surgery as soon as possible. So I basically maxed out every credit card I had, got a loan, and went to San Francisco to have an outpatient double mastectomy. And I remembered thinking, this is the pinnacle of my transition. This is everything I've ever wanted. After that, I knew the surgery was going to make me legally male. So I would no longer have a license that said I was female. I could change my birth records. It was like I could erase Laura and completely be on that path. So I chose a surgeon in San Francisco just because he was one of the world's most premier or most well-known for this type of surgery. But Oklahoma recognized all the documents. I got a letter from the surgeon stating that I had transitioned medically with an irreversible surgery from female to male. I was able to get my driver's license changed. I was able to get my birth certificate changed. And they gave me what was called a long form to where it looked like I had actually been born a male as Jacob Perry instead of Laura Perry as a female. So I got this surgery done in San Francisco, California, but I brought all the documentation back to Oklahoma, and I was able to go to the DMV and get my driver's license changed to state that I was legally male. I eventually got my birth certificate changed here in Oklahoma City, and it stated that I was born male as a boy named Jacob Perry, as if I had never been born female in the first place. Well, it really started, for a long time, I was just sort of going through the motions, and I was really looking forward to each step, and then I can do this, and then I can do that. And I thought about being transgender 24/7. It really consumed me because it was like I was always just waiting for that identity to be real, and then I can get on with the rest of my life. But then with each step, it still wasn't, the dysphoria wasn't going away, and it wasn't making it real. And I remember thinking, like, at what point does this become real? Because I thought it would be more real by now. And after I had a hysterectomy and I had the ovaries removed, and I thought I had rid of all the sort of female parts, even though I hadn't had genital reassignment surgery, but I didn't have any of the, those reproductive organs. And so I thought, well, that should have resolved the dysphoria. And I thought, well, it's because I still haven't had genital reassignment surgery. But when I started looking at that, no one had ever told me how horrible those surgeries are, how fake and artificial it is, that this was never going to be real, and there were all kinds of horrible complications. I've heard horror stories of people that have had these operations. And, I know of a girl that ended up in a wheelchair. I know that a girl that has had over 30 corrective surgeries. I know of ones that had tissue necrosis where it just started dying, all kinds of infections, leakage problems, and it was terrifying. And on top of that, at the time, statistics were saying 40 to 60% would lose all sexual feeling. This seems to prove that this goes against nature. I mean, I at the time, I didn't want to admit that. I wanted this to be real so bad. I was willing to do anything, and I was getting more and more desperate to somehow make this real. And I spent hundreds, if not thousands of dollars on all kinds of fake prosthetics and all kinds of things to try to make this real, and trying everything I could to affirm this male identity. And everybody around me began to believe it. I had a new job where I was only known as male. No one knew I was trans, and I thought that would bring freedom. But actually, that began to torment me because now I had to hide everything. Everybody around me believed I was a male. I had to reinvent my entire life. And that began to just put me in such mental torment. I remember I couldn't even have a normal conversation with anybody because all I would be thinking is, do they know? Have they figured this out? Do they believe me? And half the time I missed what they said. And then I realized I was lying to people that had become my friends at work. And this just really began to torment me. And I got into a very deep, dark place of depression, became very suicidal because it was like, I don't know what to do about this. But there was so much pain thinking about being a woman again. It's like, that's not the answer. I can't go back to being a woman, but I'm not ever going to be a man. And that began to really crush me. It's like, what now?
Now that we had gained a first-hand account of what it truly means to be transgender, we decided to take a detour. What about the parents of a transgender child? How did it begin? How does it affect marriages and families? We sat down with 3 parents across Oklahoma in order to understand how this phenomenon had affected their lives.
So one morning, her junior year, we were fighting. I made her take a shower. I insisted she was going to school. And I thought, I'm going to check her phone, which I cannot believe that I did not do that before this, because like I said, she'd been having some issues. And I went upstairs and checked her phone. And what I saw was a picture of her dressed in her brother's clothes with a ball cap on backwards. And her little friend had texted, "My handsome man." She was born premature, probably about 6 weeks. And so she had problems when she was younger, as far as she had horrible vision problems, sensory processing, and the counselor at school, it was hard to fully diagnose autism because she had some symptoms of it, but then, she would do okay. She felt very uncomfortable in her body. Any relationship that she'd had with boys weren't fun, weren't enjoyable. Her friends started either being cruel to her, abandoning her, or they just didn't care to be her friend. They wanted to have nothing to do with her. Well, she found a little girl online that had like interests. They liked a pop star together, which at first I was very thankful for that relationship because the little girl was so kind and caring, and Jenna needed that. But it got to where that Jenna was constantly in her room with this. I would try to have her friends over and stuff, and I'd walk in the kitchen and I'd be like, "Where's Jenna?" "She's in her room." And she would be up in her room on her phone with this little girl. And then it got to where she just was by herself on Friday nights, no one to go to the football games with, but she was happy to be in her room on the internet. Her maybe feeling like she was in love with this little girl or so devoted to her at the time that she knew maybe that we would not go for that, but maybe if she was a boy, that would make it okay. I mean, I feel like she did get on the internet and read and hear all those different things that's on there that makes you feel like, okay, maybe that's why I'm this way, or maybe that's why I feel this way. This little girl at first was very the same way Jenna was, but she was raised in a culture that does not stand for that. She was Bangladesh. Her parents took her to Bangladesh for a month, and she came back a changed child. And that devastated Jenna. One of her therapists actually, approached us with that. "I think you need to go on this journey with Jenna." Of course, I'm always wanting the best for her, but for one split second, I thought, well, do I need to do this? And my husband said, "I will never do this. We will not do this, ever. I will never be on board with this." And that gave me the courage to think, yeah, me too.
There were things about my daughter's childhood and experiences that I think made her particularly susceptible and vulnerable to a lifestyle that was alternative. And I would say that up until a certain point, and we don't know exactly when that point was, because there were things like discovering that she and her brother had accessed pornography on our computer system maybe a couple of years before that or whatever, and we thought we had shut it down. And so there's obviously a lot of experiences she had that we were unaware of, but there were things unique to her that I think made her really vulnerable to a barrage of online, whatever you call it, grooming, sexualizing, whatever. Somehow I think that differentness through this online culture has been exploited. And I think that for her, it feels so right to be enfolded into this alternate, whatever, trans community, I guess, that I think one search leads to something else and to something else. And I'm not saying it's an organized group, but you're going to get fed stuff. My husband and I both feel strongly that this has been a progression. And she has now identified, and now she does view herself as trans. As closely aligned as my husband and I are, it causes a significant amount of conflict, because when you're in a crisis mode, everything sort of is under a microscope. You're just wondering, should I say that this way, or should he approach that this way, or whatever. It's just being under pressure all the time. There's a lack of spontaneity, actually. The fun, spontaneous moments of family life kind of go away. And everything starts feeling hard because you're filtering and you're discussing with your husband, how are we going to handle this or that? Or I would say that our daughter became self-aware in a way that maybe she didn't like herself as she went through puberty. She doesn't have the same kind of looks as other girls. She is very awkward physically. She has significant sort of underlying medical conditions, like just a whole host of different things that would keep her from just doing athletics and things that a lot of girls would be involved in. And she has a different way of looking at things. She's way more outside the box, artistic, that kind of thing. She wasn't sure she wanted to join the youth group at our church. We encouraged her. And before even that, we took one of the pastors who oversaw that aside. We were already facing a lot of concern. We took him aside and we said, is this a safe place for our daughter? Do you vet these young people who are leading these groups? What do you do to vet them? What can you tell us to help us to feel safe with this? And we were assured that these were great kids and it would be safe. And then we found out, after she had invested 2.5, almost 3 years into this small group with a specific small group leader, that small group leader had called her by her alternate name for the entire time, had never challenged her on her false beliefs of some sort of a hybrid religion that mixes Christianity with a cult and transgenderism and all of these things, just like this amalgamation or whatever. And that was never, those beliefs that she held were never challenged by her small group leader. And in fact, if anything, I look back on it and I think of all the times that girl came to her home, there was an attitude that was displayed, which I can see in hindsight, of the small group leader, where she really didn't want to converse with me. She came off as unfriendly towards me. It was almost like she had the attitude that she was sort of rescuing my daughter, championing her and stepping in to help my daughter.
I was sitting in Costco waiting to have my tire fixed because I'd run over a nail. I was sitting in the concession stand area. I opened up Facebook and I saw a post that she had made because she was still on Facebook at the time. And she was still her name, which is Grace. And she hadn't done anything related to the trans identity yet. But she made a post about a very detailed, long post about how she was in love with a video game character who is a cartoon skeleton. And I just remember sitting there and crying in the middle of Costco because it's like, what do I do with this? It was so bizarre, and I just didn't know what to do with it. But that was the moment that I realized there was something majorly different. I don't know even how to describe it. It just had a different feel to it, and it was like another level of stuff. Grace is my firstborn, and we named her Grace because we're very strong Christians, and I wanted to be reminded of God's grace to me every day. She is grace. And how can I call her anything else? Because that's who she is. That's who God made her. And, the name isn't just about the person. It's about so many other things and so many other people. It's not a wholly selfish thing. So I think that people need to realize that. She is an amazing, amazing artist. And she did amazing art that was way beyond her years from about the age 6. As she started to get more into these communities and spent more time online, I would say, her art started to get very dark, a lot of death overtones and, dripping ink and just really kind of and bizarre things. I came across a website or a game server called Otcraft. It was a Minecraft game server for autistic people. And I assumed it would be a safe place for her to just go play Minecraft with some other kids who had her same struggles, and maybe they could relate to each other and encourage each other. And it turned out not to be that at all. I found out pretty quickly that the LGBT community was very prevalent within Otcraft. And not only were people just in there, but they were pushing things. She had a major problem with becoming a woman. She did not want to be a woman. She did not want the things that came along with being a woman. She struggled with that a lot. And I think that was a factor in pushing her the direction that she went, because, she started out as non-binary. She didn't want to be any sex. She just wanted to pretend like that wasn't part of the package. There's been a progression, from one thing to the next in that regard, because we were having lots of discussions about affirmation and what level of affirmation was acceptable. And there was no acknowledgement, even from some pastors that we were dealing with, that this is a cult, that we shouldn't affirm any of it because it's a lie. And if, as Christians, we want to lead our children in the right direction, in the direction that we believe is right, that's best for them. And how can we do that if we're participating in a lie and affirming that for them, that we're affirming that God made a mistake, that they're not who He made them to be? So when she was 19, she disappeared from my house one morning. Who had helped her leave on the sly was someone who had been one of her therapists. That therapist had been married to a woman at one point. So I don't know how involved that therapist was in all of that and the progression of that, but she is the one who drove her to the airport and stuff like that. She hadn't been our therapist for, I don't know, a couple of years.
As you can imagine, this paints a very different side of the trans movement and leaves behind a brokenness in its wake. Parents are left no choice but to navigate a new reality, even at the cost of losing their child. However, there is hope for many.
So when did you feel like that there was like a moment where things begin to unravel and it was like you knew that living as a trans male was not going to be the way forward for you?
In my case, it was a bit of a process. It was a few moments. It really started several months after another failed suicide attempt. I had started working really, really hard in therapy. I had turned to a lot of different things to try to heal myself, to fix myself, and to start to want to live. But nothing was working. I was still miserable. I was just asking, just in general, God, the universe, whatever. I didn't have a direction with the question really, but I was like, what am I doing wrong? What am I missing? I should be so much better by now. As soon as I finished asking the question, I had this vivid image of me with long hair and a dress running to Jesus, and he just had his arms open like this, and he picked me up and spun me around like a little girl. And it was just the most beautiful image, but it completely shocked me because I was living full-time as male. I had like a full beard. I was passing. Gender dysphoria was not something I was actively wrestling with. I didn't have any doubts about transitioning. I was convinced that I was a man. So seeing that image completely shocked me, really disarmed me. And I was like, what am I supposed to do with this? So I buried it. I pretended like it didn't happen. I just kind of stuffed that for months. Throughout those months, though, I felt Jesus kept pursuing me, kept like speaking to me through people, through just all these different things. My heart just started to melt more and more. And finally, he just, because of his faithfulness and how obviously he was pursuing my heart, I finally came to a point of like, okay, Jesus, like, you're real. Like, I can't pretend like you're not anymore. You're clearly God and who you say you are. And I have this desire in my spirit to be with you. I want to serve you. But I can't be a woman. It's too scary. I can't be a woman. And part of my hesitation and even coming to him was I felt in my spirit that he always called me Zoe, my birth name. I was terrified of that. I had changed my whole life. It was a lot to come to terms with. So I just told him, hey, I want to be with you, but I can't be a woman. And the same night that I told him that, I had a dream that I know was from him. And basically he was telling me, just come home. Just come as you are, come home. You'll be white as snow. Don't worry about the gender part. Don't worry about detransitioning right now. Just come home, you'll be white as snow. And we'll write your story together. That was all I needed. Just his love and willingness to have me as I was. I didn't have to fix anything. I didn't have to clean myself up first or do anything to earn his love as I was. He just wanted me. At the same time, I also knew he called me Zoe. And so I just, spending time with him, I started reading the Bible and just spending time with him. More and more, I began to see myself how he saw me. And I became more and more at peace with Zoe. And suddenly, I had no fear about stopping testosterone. And I just felt completely free to just stop. I didn't feel condemned for taking it. I didn't feel condemned for living as a man. I felt loved as Zoe so perfectly, so sufficiently that I didn't need to continue the testosterone. The more I got to know Jesus, the more I just wanted to be who he saw me as, because it's truth, it's beautiful, it's life, and even my name means abundant life. And so, it's been a long journey of healing and things I didn't even know needed healed in me. But I knew I was Zoe, and I couldn't go by the other name anymore. I couldn't live as a man anymore.
I've been married just a little over a year and a half. But this has been a long process. And honestly, in the beginning, I didn't want to detransition. And I remember one night, I kind of threw myself on the floor, so desperate for God. I was like, God, I want everything you have for me. What do you want from me? And God asked me a question. He said, if you stood before me tonight, what name would I call? I had heard the Lord calling me Laura in my prayers, and I didn't like it. I wanted to just erase that and move on. But the Lord reminded me in John chapter 1, where it says Jesus Christ himself is the creator. And he said, you can't claim to love me and yet reject my creation. And I thought God was saying, you're not good enough. You've screwed this up. But that's not what he was saying at all. He said, in the most loving voice I've ever heard, I remember the way he spoke to me with such gentleness. And he said, let me tell you who you are. And I remember feeling Like there was something greater that God had for me, something greater I'd been created for. When I first started this process and I got saved and I was so in love with Jesus and I was so grateful for what he'd done and how he was changing my heart and giving me hope and life for the first time. But I really wanted to give God everything but my identity. I really started from a place of compromise. Lord, you can have everything but this. It was like I laid out all the cards on the table. Lord, you can have it all, but I can't be a woman again. I've done too much. I have transitioned. I had a beard. I had this job where I was only known as male, and I didn't think there was any way I could go back, or I didn't want to go back. I didn't think I'd ever look like a woman again. I didn't think I'd ever feel like a woman again. And so the fact that I detransitioned was such a hard decision, but God pursued me over that 1.5 years so gently and began to show me that he had something better for me and began to call me out of that. And as I really took this leap of faith, and I honestly thought I'd be miserable the rest of my life. I was stunned at what God was doing in my heart as he began to heal me and transform me. And I began to desire a husband, but I thought, what man in his right mind is going to want to marry me after all I had been through and after all I'd done to my body, and especially a godly Christian man. But after all this trans identity and knowing that I had believed I was a man, I just thought I didn't have any hope for that. And I really believed that God was going to bring me somebody I was just going to have to learn to love, like, it's gonna be okay. But I had very low standards, and I was amazed God brought me this man that I have just loved so much and has been an amazing husband to me, and just been so strong and such a wonderful partner and complement, and just, I think, really have become a team, He's been an incredible part of not just my story, but really of my life.
So think about, when did it all fall apart, and when did you realize you could no longer be Lance? How did you detransition?
So while I was Lance with the appearance of, I went to my son's house. I tried to spend some time with him and tried to reintroduce myself to him as Lance. And he told me that he never wanted to see me like that again. He was very unaccepting of it, and he just walked away from me, and it hurt my feelings really bad. And so I thought about, man, I need recovery. I need something different. I don't know what's wrong with me, but I need something different. So I walked into the church that I was familiar with, told him that I needed help. And one of the ladies that I knew really well from prison, who knew me as Lacey, said, listen, pastor's not gonna let you have that in this program. And I thought about it, and I thought about how people would look at me doing all that.
Being trans or coming out?
Like, just trying to be that way at the beginning of recovery. Like, at that moment in time, I was like, you know what? This isn't who I am. She didn't see me as Lance. She saw me as Lacey.
Your pastor.
Yeah, a good friend that was there working alongside him. And she had remembered the female that I was. She had remembered Lacey when she made that statement. And I had thought about the person that I really was and who God saw me, how God saw me. And so I left. I went back to my son's house. I shaved my face, and I decided that I was going to take the next step to come back. It didn't happen all at once. It didn't happen like that just because I shaved my face. I had to work through so many things, but there's so much mercy on the other side. There's so much grace on the other side of that. I'm grateful to have become Lacey again.
And so, here in Middle America, we found darkness, we found pain, we found lost children and hopeful mothers. We found confusion and loss. But we also found what it means to live after death. We found that no matter how hard you try to alter who you are, it will eventually lead you back to the beginning. It can lead you home. It can lead you to a place where you can face the true version of yourself and finally be at peace. There is an entire generation that has been medically dissected and brutalized. But that generation is beginning to talk back. When they are ready to tell their story, we will be here, and we will be waiting. There is a wave that is coming, and it cannot be stopped. A wave of those that were silenced for a time, but the silence is breaking. They carry their scars and their stories. They carry the vulnerability and boldness to be wrong and tell the world about it. They carry the humility to change the trajectory of their futures. They may have been disfigured, mutilated, and sterilized. Soul and flesh have been wounded by a false system of identity. But the story does not end there. They are still here. They are still full of hope. They are alive, and they are mighty. They are mighty.